This punishment was among the most merciless methods of slow death in the Assyrian world. It involved chaining a living person to a solid stone column or wall and leaving them there until death claimed them not by a weapon, but by time itself. The condemned were stripped of clothing and their arms bound with heavy iron chains fixed directly to palace or temple columns. These were often tall, sun-heated stone pillars that absorbed the day's heat and burned the skin on contact. Once secured, there was no movement possible, only standing or hanging in painful stillness. The punishment worked by prolonged exposure and exhaustion. Under the scorching sun, the victim's body rapidly dehydrated. Sweat turned to salt, lips cracked, and breathing became a struggle. At night, the same stone turned cold, draining warmth from the flesh and tightening the chains around stiff muscles. Days passed without food or water. The body began to fail in stages: dizziness, swelling, bleeding from cracked skin. Insects crawled across the open wounds, feeding on dried sweat and blood. The condemned remained conscious through much of it, unable to sit, sleep, or shield themselves. Some victims died from heatstroke or shock within a day, while others survived for several days before finally collapsing, their weight pulling painfully against the iron restraints. Death often came through dehydration, exhaustion, or cardiac failure caused by stress and immobility. The corpse was usually left hanging long after death, the body stiffened and darkened by the elements. Birds fed on it, and the wind carried the smell across the city as a visible warning to anyone who dared defy the law. The chained to a column punishment was not designed merely to kill, it was designed to erase dignity slowly, turning a living person into a decaying symbol of obedience. Bound to unyielding stone, the victim's suffering became a message carved into the air itself: no one escaped the empire's command, not even in death. Exposure was one of the cruelest punishments practiced in ancient times. It meant leaving a person, often an infant, enemy, or prisoner, completely unprotected under the open sky, to die slowly from nature itself. The condemned were taken to remote places, rocky hillsides, forests, or city edges, and left there without food, water, or shelter. There were no weapons used, no executioners, and no instant death. The punishment relied entirely on time, suffering, and the environment. Those exposed were usually naked or lightly clothed, their bodies left to burn under the sun during the day and freeze during the night. Insects bit into their skin. Hunger and thirst consumed them from within. Some died from exhaustion, others were torn apart by wild animals before death could come naturally. Infants left through exposure often perished within hours, their small bodies too weak to survive the cold or heat. Adults suffered far longer. A person could remain alive for several days, delirious, dehydrated, unable to move, surrounded by their own decay. There was no burial afterward. The remains were left to rot where they fell, to be eaten by animals or carried away by wind and rain. The goal was to erase existence, to kill without touching, to destroy without mercy. Exposure was not only a sentence of death. It was a form of humiliation, a declaration that the condemned was unworthy of even a human death. Their final punishment was isolation itself, forced to face the slow destruction of body and mind under the indifferent gaze of nature. The river oath was one of the most chilling punishments in the ancient Hittite world, a method that used nature itself as the executioner. It wasn't a punishment of direct torture, but of forced surrender to divine judgment through drowning. When a person was accused of lying, betrayal, or breaking an oath, they were brought before flowing water, usually a strong river or stream considered sacred. The punishment began with a declaration that the river gods would decide guilt or innocence. The condemned had no defense, no witnesses, and no appeal. Their fate depended entirely on survival. The accused was bound or weighted before being thrown into the river. In some cases, their hands were tied behind their back; in others, heavy stones were attached to their limbs or waist. The water decided their truth. If they sank and drowned, it was taken as proof that the gods had found them guilty. If by some chance they floated or escaped the current, they were considered innocent and released. The cruelty of the river oath lay in its illusion of fairness. It appeared to offer a divine choice, but in reality, it was almost always a slow, agonizing death. Bound and helpless, most could not resist the pull of the current. The weight dragged them under, forcing muddy water into their lungs as they struggled for air. Drowning came gradually, first panic, then suffocation, then darkness. The victims' bodies often reappeared days later downstream, bloated and pale, their death seen as divine confirmation of guilt. In other versions of this punishment, the accused was made to stand in freezing water for long periods, swearing innocence as the cold numbed their body. Some collapsed from exhaustion or hypothermia before the ritual even ended. To the watchers, the river's silence was final judgment. To the condemned, it was an execution masked as divine justice, death disguised as destiny. The river oath did not simply kill, it humiliated. It forced a person to prove innocence with their last breath and to surrender life as proof of truth. For the Hittites, the water did not wash away sin, it swallowed it. Crucifixion is a method of execution that kills by suspending a person from a wooden structure, usually a cross or upright stake, using nails, ropes, or a combination of both. Death occurs slowly through exhaustion, blood loss, and suffocation. How it worked. The condemned person was first forced to carry or drag the wooden beam to the execution site. Once there, their arms were stretched wide, and either ropes were tied or large iron spikes were driven through the wrists or forearms into the wood. The feet were then fixed in place, often nailed together or side by side to the upright post. The victim's body hung with the full weight pressing on the arms and chest. This made breathing extremely difficult. Every inhale required pushing up with the legs and pulling against the wounds. As exhaustion set in, the muscles could no longer lift the body, and breathing became shallow and labored. Within minutes, the person experienced searing pain from torn nerves and strained muscles. Circulation slowed, leading to swelling, cramps, and loss of sensation in the limbs. Dehydration and blood loss caused weakness, delirium, and blurred vision. Over several hours, sometimes days, asphyxiation occurred as the chest muscles failed to expand, or the heart collapsed under strain. Sometimes, executioners broke the victim's legs to hasten death, preventing them from lifting their body to breathe. If left untouched, death could take more than a day, with the condemned alternating between consciousness and unconsciousness in unbearable pain.